Good evening and welcome to Mental Health Matters After Hours. Now, we know that you are here because you want to improve your self-development. You might want to engage with academic interest in our topics. You may wish to seek support, and you've come to the right place because this is the show where we take a deep dive into all things mental health and well-being with the experts. We are privileged to always bring you the experts who are leading in their field, the thought leaders, the practitioners who can really unpack the topics we cover as well as give support. And we always pop in the links in the show notes. Today is no exception to that. The phrase trauma bonding has become very popular in psychological speak, but we don't always understand what that really means. In some cases, I've even heard that trauma bonding can be two people who have gone through a traumatic experience and have bonded together. That's not the meaning that professionals give it. So today, to unpack this very important topic, we are delighted to welcome world-renowned expert Ronia Fraser. She is a multi-award-winning coach. She focuses on narcissistic abuse recovery, and she's also a hypnotherapist, and she will be able to really deep dive into this topic. Let's head over to the main studio. Ronia, thank you so much for joining us back again on Mental Health Matters. Yeah. We always love hearing from you because, I mean, you've already just flown in from Dublin, haven't you, or from Ireland, because you've been speaking globally there as well. So thank you for making time for us.
Always. Thank you for having me back.
Now, trauma bonding, we hear this phrase a lot and we're hearing it even more, and I don't know whether people really understand the depth of what it means. Do you mind explaining the term and giving us some examples?
Sure. So trauma bonding, we all have like this friend or family member who we know is in a relationship they really shouldn't be in.
Yeah.
They probably know as well. And from the outside looking in, it's so clear, but it's just impossible to get them out.
Yes.
Or they keep going back. Or maybe, we work with a client who makes really incredible progress, and then all of a sudden they go back. And obviously, from the outside looking in, it can be incredibly frustrating because it defies all rhyme and reason. However, there's a reason for that. And if somebody is in that situation, it's most likely because they are trauma bonded. And trauma bonding is an incredibly strong connection between two people in any kind of relationship where the power dynamic is off.
Yes.
And in relationships, for example, it feels like true love, like really like the biggest love you've ever had, but it has nothing to do with love at all, and obviously we will be exploring that in more detail. Absolutely.
And just to clarify, when you say power dynamic, it doesn't necessarily mean, if you're talking in the workplace, a manager and an employee. We're talking about a power dynamic within the relationship itself. So somebody is, I guess, a more dominant character.
Yeah, so it's an abusive dynamic.
Yeah.
Right? And it can happen in any kind of relationship where it's basically misaligned, right? So it can be a manager and an employee.
Can start that way, yeah.
But it can also be a colleague. It can be an elderly and a caregiver. It can be a parent and a child. For example, Stockholm Syndrome is the most famous kind of trauma bonding that most people are aware of. So it can be a kidnapper and the hostage.
Yes.
It can happen in the military. So any kind of power dynamic that's off is very it's likely that trauma bonding will happen.
It's so frightening in so many ways because I think that can just happen to us without realizing.
Yes.
How does the cycle begin and how does it then play through?
Yeah, so I take the relationships as an example because that's what happens a lot. So there is this very, very effective manipulation tactic that's called love bombing. And narcissists love using love bombing, which means they bombard you with compliments. They, maybe give you lavish gifts. Maybe they will make you feel very special and put you on a pedestal and you're so amazing. And I mean, obviously we all want to feel special, right? We all want to be loved. We all want to belong, which is normal, totally natural. However, if we within ourselves have a faulty program running in the background, like a very universal one for both men and women, for example, is not feeling good enough, right? Yes. Or unworthy, unlovable, unseen, unheard, those kind of things. That's, of course, where that love bombing is totally going to hook in, and it's designed to do that. What narcissists also do is they match and mirror you to such an extent that what happens is that you actually fall in love with yourself. And that's how that whole soulmate illusion is created. But none of it is actually real, right? It's just a show. But you have the love bombing, you have the matching and mirroring, you found your soulmate, and obviously chemically what happens in the brain is that a lot of oxytocin is released, dopamine, serotonin, and under normal circumstances that of course is a good thing, right? Those chemicals make us feel good, those hormones help us bond with other people, but because it's so extreme, our brain actually gets dysregulated. So that's the first part that happens. Yes. And then all of a sudden, basically out of nowhere, it's a little bit like it creeps in with this smiling face, right? Under the pretense of really immense trust and true love. But then it very quickly turns into a cycle of abuse. So it's a bit like pouring drain unblocker down your sink. Within seconds, you have corrosion. Within minutes, you have erosion of the underlying block. Wow. But when we then actually put that onto ourselves, that corrosion, that erosion is actually happening to ourselves, it's happening to our reality. So it will start very subtly, where you kind of go like, did they just say that? I must have misheard, because it really doesn't match the person you think you know. Yes. So you kind of find an excuse. Oh, maybe they had a bad day at work or something. You brush it off. But that keeps happening. And then the gaslighting comes in. And gaslighting, by the way, is not somebody disagreeing with you. Gaslighting is actually a form of mental torture that distorts the reality to such an extent that the person on the receiving end starts questioning their sanity. Yes. So it's incredibly, incredibly destabilizing. And then all of a sudden, everything they used to love about you, they start to despise, and it really starts chipping away on your identity. And so what happens is that all those feel-good chemicals are replaced. They instantly leave the body because your body goes into a natural stress response, and it's flash flooded with adrenaline, with cortisol, and then, of course, your body is in a stress response. And that's incredibly uncomfortable. But what also happens when we have a stress response is that our sympathetic nervous system gets activated, our limbic system, where our emotion sits, where the emotional response sits. But the prefrontal cortex, where all your logic, your planning, your risk assessment sits, goes out of the window. And that's a very interesting thing with trauma bonding, because it has nothing to do with willpower. It's actually chemical reactions that happen in the brain, and that's what we need to understand. So first you have this really high, and if you think about it, what's the highest high there is? It's love, right? And trauma bonding is also called love addiction.
That's interesting.
Okay. So you have this incredible high, then all of a sudden this is taken away, which causes a lot of confusion. It causes cognitive dissonance. It causes you to go into stress response. And when that happens for the first time, the person most likely tries to get out because it's just so horrid. But given the circumstances, it's quite likely that the person has poor boundaries anyway.
Yes.
Right? Is very adverse to conflict. Yeah. And then what happens? The mask comes back on. And oh, look, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and you get that high again. Yeah. And what is happening here with this intermittent reinforcement of reward and punishment is that actually a chemical dependency in the brain is forming. And I think that's the most important key to understand abuse survivors, because all of a sudden it makes much more sense why they behave the way they do.
Yes.
And if you understand how the brain works, our brain will naturally always associate something or someone who helps us through trauma with safety. So when then all of a sudden somebody, an abuser, comforts you and apologizes, even for something that they have caused themselves, the brain will still latch onto this positive reinforcement, and that's how we then end up in situations where people get treated badly over and over and over again, but the brain doesn't want to make them leave, because when it's good, it's so good.
Yes,
right?
yes.
And that's how then the cycle begins. So it starts out very subtly, and then it's just back and forth, hot and cold, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. So, and that is an actual chemical dependency in the brain.
And I think that added to the point which I've never heard before, of the mirroring causing you effectively to fall in love with yourself, or somebody who that you always hear, they really get me.
Yes.
They absolutely understand me. And that is the powerful bit, because of course that plays into the faulty programming as well.
And we like people that are like us.
Of course.
Right. And then for the first time, you feel understood.
Yes.
And that, of course, is incredibly, incredibly powerful.
Yes, absolutely. Now, you've said before that trauma bonding can be forged between many different couple dynamics. You can have the intimate family and you can have the relationship. Is there a difference in how it starts out and plays out in, say, the family situation compared to the intimate relationship one?
Not really, because the tactics are all the same.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, it's always about this intermittent reinforcement of reward and punishment. And however that plays out doesn't matter, because, what the abuser does is they create this dynamic. The dynamic leads to the chemical reactions in the brain, and that's where the trauma bond then happens.
Yeah, wow.
Can I just quickly ask, on that then, is it possible that this can happen in a workplace too?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and in a workplace, it will, somebody, you start in a workplace, and then somebody really loves everything you do. And you are like the best hire ever. And I mean, we obviously all love hearing those kind of things, especially when your career is important, when you are ambitious, and then all of a sudden they start going behind your back, or they intentionally make you run into traps, and then obviously but it happens the same way. Like, first and foremost, there's always the flattery, there's always the being nice, because they need to get that dopamine hit in the brain, and because that is what you want back. And then you find yourself in a situation where they keep crossing your boundaries over and over again, and you just try to get that praise back, that acknowledgement.
Yes, of course you do, because you had it and then now you've lost it, and then you can't help thinking it must be you. Because if they've told you you're so good at whatever, suddenly why aren't I good enough anymore?
Yeah, so interesting. Thank you so much. And it's really great actually that you've really explained, because I think a lot of forums and people talk about trauma bonding as two people, as you said, two people going through a shared traumatic experience, and that bonds them together, which is what I understood that to mean.
So
I'm glad
because that never occurred to me. But because for me, I was always in this line of field. For me, this was always what it meant. But if you think about it just from a language point of view, of course it makes sense.
Yeah,
it does make sense
linguistically. However, is more kind of bonded through a shared trauma, as
and you've
opposed
explained
to trauma
bonding
right?
you.
And if you share this experience of a trauma, that is actually, and then you bond over that. That's actually healthy, right? Because you have this support network, and this mutual understanding. But what's missing there, obviously, is that toxic dynamic, this relationship dynamic, the power dynamic that's off, and that's what trauma bonding relates to. So trauma bonding always relates to this dysfunctional relationship dynamic.
That's so important.
Thank you.
Yeah,
yes,
absolutely. And I think when you said another word can be love addiction,
exactly,
that really makes perfect sense. And yes, bonding over a shared experience is is very, very different.
Yeah.
So, no, thank you for that.
Thank you.
It's so helpful. Ronia's staying with us. We'll be back just after this. Welcome back to Mental Health Matters After Hours. It's such a pleasure to have you here, Ronia. And we are talking about the subject of trauma bonding, also known as love addiction. And that really places a weight on that, just in normal colloquial language, because we understand that addictions can be dangerous for us. And to connect that with the word love, it suddenly says quite a lot,
Yes,
isn't there?
it does.
So, Ronia, how do we, and I guess this is the hardest question, how do we even recognise the trauma bond when we're in it? Because when you're in it, I just feel you can't see anything.
Which is true. So you're in this bubble.
Yes.
Right? And you are an addict at that point,
Yes.
which means you keep chasing the high anyway. Yes. But of course there are indications, and it's not somebody from the outside telling you, because you're not going to listen anyway, right? And which is very frustrating for the person who has to watch this. But if you are not functioning in your real life, when you can't do your day-to-day tasks because your mind just keeps going back to them, then that is an indication that something isn't quite right here. What you also have in trauma-bonded relationships is that everything happens at an incredibly high speed, a lot of times at the detriment of family and friends, because they can see it, but you're not going to hear it. And I got married after like 4 weeks, or maybe it was 6 weeks. I thought it was very rock and roll. You know?
Romantic and passionate.
And obviously looking back now, of course it was completely dysfunctional. And everybody else saw it, but I didn't, because I was in love. And I was so in love, right? So everything happens at an extremely fast pace. You're not going to listen to the people that will actually try and help you. And when you are in a situation, whether that's in work or in a relationship, and you're really unhappy and really miserable, but you can't bring yourself to leave, that's an indication that you're trauma bonded. Because what happens is when you actually do try and leave, oftentimes it comes with withdrawal and sometimes really severe withdrawal symptoms. So I had, in my experience, my whole body would be shaking. And that's when I actually started using that language, because I couldn't explain what was happening with me, but I wanted to make myself understood to my friends. And I said, I don't know what's wrong with me. I feel like an addict.
Wow.
I didn't know I was actually dealing with an addiction, but that's how it felt. Like my whole body responded to that. And it also, trauma bonding creates this illusion that you can't function without the other person. You can't actually survive with the other person. That's obviously very, very powerful.
Yes. It's frightening. And moreover, there are hangovers from the trauma bonding as well. Even
actually,
when
can I put something in there? Because there's a little test that you can do to if you're questioning whether you're trauma bonded or not. If somebody were to come to you as a friend and is asking for advice, and they tell you about a very similar situation they're in, and your response without even hesitating is, you got to get out of that, but you can't actually take your own advice in your situation, that would indicate that you're trauma bonded.
That makes perfect sense, because we always talk about this as what would you advise a friend?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's to look at self-compassion.
Yes.
But that's brilliant to then reflect on that and say, well, why can't I follow that advice that I would be giving?
Oh, and actually another indication, which is very, very common, and you can recognize it in yourself, is when you actually really only focus on the good to justify the bad and find excuses, and you're really waiting for those empty promises to come through, because that's what they do, right? It's all that empty talk, but it never happens. So consciously, you already know it won't happen, but you really hang on to this hope.
Yes.
Right. So that creates that dynamic.
Yes, it keeps it's that almost breadcrumbing in a way, is it keeps you hanging on for that hope everything will pay off. But you also make a very good point, something that we say on the show a lot, that a good day is not a bad day.
Yes, exactly.
it's I think we spoke about this before. Oh, I had a really good day because he didn't shout at me. He didn't call me names. That's not a good day.
Yeah.
So this actually comes from an audience question, and this is where they've been in an abusive relationship. They were actually manipulated by not only the partner in the relationship, but the child of the partner in the relationship. And now they were able to get out of it after a very long time, but they now still struggle with conflict. Seeing anyone in conflict whatsoever, it brings out that same kind of almost addictive withdrawal reaction. Is that normal?
Well, that reaction has nothing to do with the trauma bond.
Right.
So the trauma bond would be being stuck on the other person, right? Despite of getting out, you would still think about them all the time. You would replay everything all the time, which actually feeds into the addiction, right? Because you replay the good memories.
Yes,
you focus only on the good. And the brain can't distinguish if something's happening for real or whether you're imagining it. So just by imagining it, you get that dopamine hit again, which is the hook.
Yeah.
So that would be trauma bonding.
Right.
In that situation, obviously feeling uncomfortable in conflict situations partially has to do with her experience, right? Because that's the situation that she got to know and always had to compromise herself to keep the peace.
Yes, exactly that.
But most likely, and I mean, I'm assuming here, but it's a professional assumption, she has always been very risk adverse because, you know, it goes against a value that's very strong for her. Maybe that's harmony or, you know, in that dynamic, love, fear of abandonment, like any sort of that. So it's to be expected that a conflict situation presses that button, just as the previous conflict situation also pressed that same button.
Yes.
So that situation is not trauma bonding as such, but of course it's a trauma response.
Brilliantly explained. Thank you. And I guess I know we've got so many questions for you. Where do you, once you've recognised it, once you can see that, where do you make those energy shifts to begin to heal? You can tell yourself, no, that wasn't a healthy relationship. I know, I don't feel it.
Well, first and foremost, you've got to get out. And that's where a lot of survivors are really resistant to. But if you then go back to understanding we're dealing with an addiction, also that makes more sense, right? Because going no contact means cutting off your supply. But at the same time, if you think about it in an addiction, from an addiction point of view, the narcissist is not only the drug, they're the drug dealer at the same time, which means they're in complete control over how you are allowed to feel. So the moment you remove yourself from that situation, what will naturally happen is that your nervous system starts regulating again. When your nervous system regulates, you have much more options available and you can start navigating again. The brain fog lifts. So no contact and removing yourself from that situation must be the course of action. And then there will be a lot of resistance, understandably. It's the hardest thing to do, but the moment you do, it has an instant positive impact. And then it's really about shifting the focus, because naturally, as an addict, your mind will always default back to the high, right? So it's important to get really conscious and proactively shifting that focus away from them and what has happened and onto yourself. And the best way to do that is self-care.
Yeah, of course.
And self-care, again, is something that doesn't come naturally, because most likely when you come out of a relationship like that, you've up until this point never done anything for yourself. That's what got you into trouble in the first place, right? You've always put others' well-being before your own. So that really needs to be learned. And self-care, I'm not talking about the hair or the nails, right? I'm talking about really like profound healthcare from the inside, self-care from the inside out, that very quickly, because it's designed to make you feel good, that very quickly helps you then actually shift the focus onto yourself, your well-being, your healing, and that's how you then start moving forward. And they're really like simple, practical tools that you can use to help that.
Which we will come to some of those later on.
Yeah, that makes an awful lot of sense.
It really does.
So even if you do that and you start looking after yourself, how easy might it be to kind of slip back into the cycle of trauma bonding and maybe not with the same person or in the same relationship, but with someone else, just repeating the cycle. Yeah.
I mean, it is very easy. And because, as we said, it has nothing to do with willpower. It really is a chemical reaction in the brain. But of course, if you focus on your healing, if you identify all the, faulty, outdated programs that get you into trouble in the first place, that will disrupt the dynamic that you would be attracted to those kind of people in the first place, right? So you kind of remove the chances of that happening, and of course you will recognize it easier, because if you feel good within yourself, if you feel good enough, you will never put up with being treated in that way. It would happen once and you go like, no, I'm done and I'm out of here, But from the possibility of it happening, it can happen to anybody in any situation.
Okay, and so that again, there's always some semblance of love, at least in a trauma bond relationship. How can we recognise the difference between healthy and unhealthy love?
Well, healthy love doesn't feel that way. You're not consciously anxious. You're not constantly walking on eggshells. You're not constantly compromising yourself and your wants and your needs and your opinions. You actually feel safe and you feel comfortable in expressing yourself. You feel comfortable in who you are. That's how a healthy relationship looks like. In a trauma bonded relationship, none of that will exist, because you're running on adrenaline and you have that constant anxiety. You don't recognize the person looking back at you in the mirror. You feel like an addict. We already said that.
Yeah.
You're walking on eggshells the whole time. So if you're feeling destabilized around a person, well, that's time to get out.
Okay.
Just before we break, the destabilizing word that's quite helpful, because at the start of that relationship, I guess it can mimic healthy in some ways, because...
And it will, because it hooks you in, right?
Yes.
Yeah, but that's what's taken away.
Destabilizing, isn't it? Because I think in a healthy relationship, I don't think you are quite as love-bombed. Do you know what I mean? Yes. I don't think they are the most perfect person in the whole world. It's like, they're all right.
It just feels
okay. It's fun.
Normal.
It's a more casual response to it, and healthy.
Yeah.
And there is no need either, right? Because trust is supposed to be built over time.
Yes.
Whereas in those situations, because of the love bombing, the guard comes down very quickly, and the trust all of a sudden is instant, because it's the most magnificent person you've ever met in your life. And that in itself is a massive red flag, because in healthy relationship, that doesn't matter. It takes time to get to know somebody.
Yes.
Yeah, makes sense.
Oh gosh, so much to think about. We're keeping Ronia, and we'll be back just after this.
Greetings, I'm Angel Marie Monticelli, host of Energize You TV, every Thursday at 11 a.m. Pacific Time. Go to Fresh Takes right here on E360 and get Reiki-fied and energized today.
Welcome back to Mental Health Matters After Hours. This is one of the most fascinating discussions we've had on the subject of trauma bonding. We are very, very lucky to have with us Ronia Fraser. She is world-renowned in this field and really talks a lot about how to recover from narcissistic abuse. She's a multi-award winning coach in that respect as well. Now, Ronia, trauma bonding, we don't often discuss it, but you did mention it earlier. In the case of the carer and an either elderly person who may have a lot of money, for example, and or a disabled person, and you get a situation where that person, that the narcissistic abusive carer, is not only abusing the elder or the person they're caring for, but in the eyes of everybody else, they are a pillar of the community because they are the one always taking them to church. They are the one taking them to the appointments. They are the one doing all of that. And they are the one then signing over, getting the power of attorney signed over to them and taking all of their money. So, you know, how do we, A, recognize that and B, break that?
Yeah. Well, there is actually because narcissists rarely are the standard classic narcissists, right? That what the first thought that occurs.
Yeah.
So full of themselves
Yeah,
and all of
yeah.
that, like standing in front of a mirror all the time. That's not it. And they come in so different shapes and forms. And one of those is the communal narcissist, right? And of course, the purpose of all of that is that should somebody then decide to speak up, nobody will believe them.
Yes.
And it always comes down to being believed, and that applies to any kind of narcissistic relationship. Doesn't have to be an elderly or a disabled person who obviously is much more dependent
Yes.
on the help and the support. But that being believed is a big thing for every survivor.
Yes.
Because just the way that the dynamic is created, that element is already taken away,
Yes.
right? The community support. And as I just said, when we deal with somebody who is elderly, who is disabled, of course, they're even more dependent on the support and the help of others. But again, first of all, it's about the recognition, what is actually going on, and then speaking up about it. So with abuse, it's always tricky because you need to catch the right person that you can share that with who will believe you.
Yes.
Because oftentimes what happens is that you share with somebody and they just brush it off. They don't even take it seriously, especially when obviously the illusion that's created doesn't match that. So that's very important to find somebody to talk about what is happening, and that can be a friend, that can be a social worker, it can be a professional, maybe another carer who you know has an idea of the situation and can maybe also put steps into place to remove the person out of this situation, because at the end of the day we need to get out, right? And of course, the dependency, it's a big challenge, and it's a real challenge. But something we also need to keep in mind is that dependency, the illusion of dependency, I mean, for an elderly and a disabled person, it's not an illusion. They are really dependent. But a big part of trauma bonding is that idea that you cannot function or survive with the other person. So while it is incredibly challenging, there is also that aspect to it, because that's what they make you believe. And it always depends on the degree of the care as well, the degree of the disability, and what the options are, of course, that somebody has available. But you need to find a support person, a support network. And of course, there are also the local councils here in the UK actually have like an adult safeguarding team.
That's true.
And those kind of people, they are obviously trained in these situations because for them, they specialize in that. So what's really important to understand, I think, is that to understand that you're not on your own here, because when we are in this situation, it's so huge and we are already not functioning properly. So it feels impossible to even deal with it. But there are resources available. Then, of course, you have the domestic violence hotlines, but there are also hotlines that specialize in elderly, that specialize in disability. So they are already aware of the additional challenges that you face. And what's also interesting, I've been playing around with AI a bit, and ChatGPT actually, I was very surprised about that. A friend told me about using ChatGPT as her like counselor kind of thing. And I'm like, okay, let me check that out. Am I going to be out of a job soon or something? And actually, what I put in was like, dear ChatGPT, how do I get out of an abusive relationship? I'm elderly, how do I get out of an abusive relationship? And the response, I was very surprised. The language is very compassionate, actually. It acknowledges the seriousness of the situation.
Wow.
It's also very encouraging, and I was very surprised by that. It sounds very human, actually. And what ChatGPT actually offers is it asks you very specific questions about your personal situation, and then actually prepares a safety plan for your particular situation, and also offers to connect you with the local help services.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So I was very pleasantly surprised by that. And of course, when we talk about elderly, that might not be the option just because of the tech.
Yes.
However, if you actually have an elderly person that you would like to help, or you suspect that something like that is going on, that's a resource. As I said, I was very, very pleasantly surprised. It was very, very clear, very compassionate, obviously, as AI can be. But language, we know language is important. And just being received by ChatGPT, I'm so glad you reached out.
Wow.
That actually... It's very powerful, and it was very, very interested in your particular circumstance, and obviously that's the information it needs to provide you with a solution. But I think when you are then actually in this situation, it's very helpful and it's very supportive, because you feel somebody is actually listening.
Yes,
And I mean, what we need in that situation is a very practical solution.
Yes.
And it's important that we put a safety plan in place, that there is planning involved, that, you make a list of all your medications, all your needs, all your requirements, because obviously the services can only help you if they know what exactly it is that you need.
So that's really answered my next question in the what might a safety plan look like. But I think just bring out that ChatGPT can be a resource. The situation with the elder abuse comes from my own experience with my cousin this is set in Malaysia, whereby it was during COVID where all of this manipulation came into play, and it was actually the bank that alerted her, because of course she couldn't see her aunt.
Oh, wow.
And what happened was the bank said, well, this person is trying to transfer a lot of money out of this bank account. I think you all need to be involved. The minute she and the rest of her siblings were involved, they were able to deal with it and get the security police and people like that involved. So there are other resources out there. No, that's scary.
And and other horror stories as well. Somebody might get to their safe place and then seek therapy. And if the therapist doesn't understand trauma bonding, then if the therapist is, and we've heard stories like this, therapists try and get the person to take responsibility for the situation that they found themselves in. How do we know that we've got the right therapist to help us go through this?
Well, at the end of the day, you do need to take responsibility for the situation you found yourself in,
yes.
right? But there is a place and there is a time, and when somebody comes out of a trauma bond, they're highly activated. Their nervous system is completely dysregulated. So when it's about finding the right therapist, I think it's important to do your research, to ask questions, and about the therapist's experience, for example, their personal experience, so you can get a bit of a feel of, do they really understand what I'm dealing with right now? Because especially with things like trauma and narcissistic abuse, it's such a popular thing now that a lot of coaches, therapists, they put it to their offering, but they just watched YouTube or read a few articles. So they don't necessarily have the right understanding or the practical tools to provide. So it's important to do your research, ask questions, and even though you may not have trusted yourself for a long time, at this particular point in time, you will be able to feel if it's the right therapist or coach. Because if it's not, it will make you feel uncomfortable. You will not feel safe. And the thing is, when you don't feel safe in a therapeutic relationship, you can't get to where you want to go because you don't feel safe.
You're going to hold on to things.
Exactly. And you will notice when you talk to somebody, if there is like some anxious undercurrent that's flowing there, then you already know. Or if you're questioning if that therapist is the right therapist for you, you actually already know your answer, because otherwise, if they were, you would be raving about them.
Yes.
Okay.
You know? So really, in those situations, do your research and trust yourself.
Yeah. Thank you. Really important. And this might be how long is a piece of string, but how long would you say it takes to recover from trauma bonding? An
With the right
experience like
tools?
that.
With the right tools, yes.
Yes.
Half an hour.
Okay.
Like the thing that needs to happen is, it's one of those things, you can't rationalize it away. You can't talk it. You can't talk it out, right? And what you can very beautifully do actually is neutralize emotional charges from memories. And in trauma recovery, that's used, you know, when somebody had an accident, they have PTSD, and they have flashbacks. So what's important with a trauma bond is the understanding, and that's missing in a lot of professionals, that we're dealing with an addiction, right? And that the hook actually is all the positive reinforcement. Because if it was only about the negative experiences, nobody would ever go back to their abuser, right? But the hook is all the positive experiences, because they were so fantastic, which means when we actually do the stabilization of the emotional well-being and regulating the nervous system, what we need to do is neutralize the positive experiences as much as the negative, right? Because the negative always have a huge impact. But with trauma bonding, it's really important to neutralize the positive experiences, because that's the hook. And every time we replay in our heads the positive experiences that we shared with that person, it feeds into the addiction, because remember, the brain can't distinguish if it's happening or not. For the brain, it's as if it's happening right now. So that's what needs to happen, and once you do that, the trauma bond is gone. I also always add a energetic disconnect, because the connections that we share with narcissists, they are really on every single level of the being, and a lot of it just doesn't make sense. It's not logic. And there's a big energetic connection as well, and everybody who's been with a narcissist knows that the moment you feel better, they will show back up. And you go like, how the heck did you know that? Like, why are you coming right now? But that's the energy, because they can energetically feel the disconnect happening, so then they need to come back with their love bombing and the dopamine hit and all of that, right? So neutralizing the experiences, so it actually doesn't carry any emotional charge whatsoever, that will allow you to just file it as something that happened, but without tapping into the emotion that's associated with it. And then disconnecting energetically, and that will take care of the trauma bond. And of course, no contact. That's the prerequisite. As long as you stay in touch, there's no way you will disconnect from that.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you very much. This has been so fascinating and enlightening. And where can we find out more about you?
Well, you can find me on social media, Rock and Roll Coach Ronnie, on Facebook and Instagram, and my website is roniafraser.com.
Now, we are keeping you, Ronia, because we want to not only just pick your brains, but you have written a book as well. And in that book, there's a lot of practical healing tools. And we are very privileged that today Ronia is going to share one of those tools in our Test the Trend segment.
I actually wrote this book for the purpose of disconnecting the trauma bond, because we need to shift the focus, and we can't shift the focus by talking about it. We actually need practical tools to move this forward. And this book is actually filled with over 50 little exercises. It's a little bit like a buffet where you can try out, and you like it, you put it in your toolbox. It's all about building your own toolbox, and it's designed to help you shift your focus away from them and what has happened, and onto yourself and your healing and finding back to you. What I would like to share with you today is a very simple exercise that very, very quickly regulates your nervous system. And the beautiful thing is you can easily do it yourself, and all you need is your hands. And simply, you can follow along. You put your right hand on your left shoulder, your left hand on the right shoulder, and you simply start stroking from the shoulder to the elbow. And this is called the havening touch. And what the havening touch does is it releases delta brain waves, which are very relaxing. And you can probably already notice what a difference this actually makes. And you can also do it in the face. And some people love it, some people don't like the face. I personally like it a lot. And if you think about it, it's not rocket science, right? What do we do when we're stressed? We rub our forehead. So it's really about becoming aware how we can utilize things that we already have to our own advantage. And then the public-friendly version, my favorite version, is this one. You simply rub your hands together. And this is something that you can actually do anywhere at any time, and nobody will know what you're doing there. That's why I love it so much. So there is a really nice protocol, because obviously when we use havening techniques, there are different kinds of applications. You would engage a qualified havening practitioner, especially when you're dealing with trauma, because it's a serious topic to deal with. But we can utilize the self-havening touch ourselves to really help ourselves to regulate ourselves and regulate our nervous system. And there's a nice protocol which you can also find in my book, which was created by my dear friend Dr. Kate Truitt, and it's called the CPR for the amygdala. So anytime you feel some emotional or nervous overwhelm, you can very, very quickly regulate yourself. And all you need to do is you apply the havening touch, and you can choose any of the three, or you can rotate between them, whatever works for you. And then you start counting from 1 to 20, counting out loud. And maybe you want to walk along a beach and feel the sand in between your toes. Maybe you want to go down some steps. Maybe you play the piano. But you count out from 1 to 20, counting out loud. 1, 2, 3, 4. While applying the havening touch. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and you may already notice, that's right, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. That's right. What you can also do, if you maybe don't like the counting, or the emotional charge hasn't fully resolved at this point, you can start counting. Maybe counting down from 20 in threes. 20, 17, 14. Oh, and it's getting difficult. 11. That's right. Very good. Or how about telling me the alphabet, but leaving the name, your name, the letters of your name out? Give that one a go. It's actually a really fun exercise to do. You're probably going to make yourself laugh. Or maybe you have a favorite children's song. Just sing Old MacDonald, or whatever comes to mind, something that makes you feel good while applying the havening touch. And what happens here, and you can already notice that, is that you're regulating your nervous system. And it feels so calm and so relaxing. And that overwhelm you started with, if you were to give it a score between 0 and 5, at this point probably is already pretty close to 0. So have a little play with it. As I said, you can find it in my book. Dr. Truitt also published a book which is called Healing in Your Hands. And if you're a fan of touch, that's something I can highly recommend, because there are a lot of beautiful things that we can do very simply, and you don't need anybody else for this other than yourself and your hands.
Ronia, thank you. We're all feeling very relaxed and very positive
yes.
now. And this is the book, Me, Myself and I by Ronia Fraser, and it is full of practical tools that you can use, including a lot of self-care in particular, which is so important. So
it's available for her and for him as well.
Yeah, which is very important because, we don't talk about men being abused quite as much, but it can happen. So, now we like to reflect in this part, and there's so much to reflect on. The love addiction for me was, I think, one of the best descriptions I've heard to describe the trauma bond. And you are so right when you talk about addiction, and immediately that puts a very different perspective on it. It's not exciting and fun and passionate. Addiction is a problem. So I love that. What about you, Jude?
Yeah, I think that really explains it really well, because I had the misconception about what trauma bonding meant. So you've really clarified that. And I think the thing that came out for me was how difficult it might be to recognise it in yourself. But then once you do, it's a massive light bulb moment. And it doesn't matter how many people say to you, oh, you need to get out, it's no good for you. But unless you recognise that for yourself, you're never going to get out of that situation.
Absolutely. So, Ronia, we're handing it over to you to give us your top tips when it comes to either recognising you're in a trauma-bonded relationship or starting the healing process.
Yeah, so my top tip really is listen to yourself and what's going on within you. So again, shifting the focus, because it's very easy to find excuses for other people, but it's not possible to just deny what's actually happening for you. And go and find professional help. It's absolutely okay to ask for help. And this is a time where we just need some tools, some guidance that we don't have at that particular point in time. I didn't either. So please reach out, and I'm not saying to me, but in general, right? Reach out and ask for help, because it's absolutely okay to do that.
Very, very wise words. Thank you so much for joining us, Ronia. We can't wait to have you back again on set. You are just such a font of knowledge, and we're so grateful to you. And from all of us here, have a good night.